There are people in this world, who are very good at living two lives. They smile at you over breakfast. They text you good night. They say I love you with just enough warmth that you never think to question it. And somewhere across town, they're doing the exact same thing. To someone else. I want you to imagine something. Imagine you meet the perfect person. Not perfect in a movie way. Not perfect in a fairy tale way. Perfect in the specific, personal way that only matters to you. She remembers how you take your coffee. She laughs at your worst jokes. She makes ordinary Tuesday evenings feel like something worth remembering. You think, this is it. This is the one. And she is thinking the exact same thing. About you. And about the man she's seeing on Wednesday nights. And about the other one she calls when she's had a bad day. My name is Ryan. And for 11 months, I was one of 3 men dating the same woman. None of us knew. Not me. Not James. Not Ethan. We each believed completely, genuinely, with our whole hearts that we were hers. And she had made sure of it. Voice quiets almost a whisper. This is not a story about anger. I want you to understand that before we go any further. Because by the time I got to the end of it, by the time the truth finally came out in the way that truths always eventually do, I wasn't angry. I was just tired. Tired of a version of myself that had trusted so completely. Tired of a love that had felt so real. Tired of wondering which moments had been genuine and which had been performance. And exhausted deeply, quietly exhausted by the realization that you can love someone with everything you have, and still not really know them at all. This is the story of 11 months. 3 men. 1 woman. And the night everything fell apart at a dinner table that none of us were supposed to be at. Music swells, then fades to silence. My name is Ryan. And I need you to hear this from the beginning. I met Olivia on a Thursday afternoon in March. Not a remarkable Thursday. Not a day with any particular meaning attached to it. I was at a bookshop, a small independent one, the kind with creaky floors and a cat that sits on the front counter and judges everyone who walks in. I was looking for a specific book. A novel a friend had recommended. I couldn't find it on the shelf, and I was doing that thing where you tilt your head sideways and read every spine twice as if the book will appear if you look hard enough. And then someone reached past me, not rudely, just confidently, and pulled a book from the shelf 2 rows above my head. Looking for something. I turned around. She was standing there with a copy of exactly the book I was looking for. How did you know? I asked. She smiled. You were tilting. People only tilt like that when they can't find what they came for. I laughed. She handed me the book. It's good, she said. The ending will ruin you. Is that a recommendation or a warning? Both, she said. And walked away. I stood there for a moment. And then, because I am the kind of person who almost never does impulsive things, I followed her to the register. Can I buy you a coffee? I said. As payment for the literary guidance. She looked at me for a second. Then she said, I have 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes became 2 hours. And those 2 hours became everything. Her name was Olivia. 29 years old. Event coordinator. Originally from Chicago, moved to the city 4 years ago for a job she'd since left for a better one. She was sharp, the kind of sharp that showed up in the specific details she noticed about things. She talked about a documentary she'd watched the night before with the same level of passion most people reserve for things that directly affect their lives. She laughed easily. Not at everything. She wasn't one of those people who perform delight. She laughed when something actually struck her as funny, which somehow made each laugh feel like a small gift. I was 31. Software developer. I worked from home mostly, which meant my social life had quietly contracted over the years to a comfortable but perhaps overly small circle. I hadn't been on a date in 8 months before that Thursday. I wasn't looking for anyone. I was looking for a book. She texted me that evening. "Did you start it yet?" I had. "The ending is going to ruin me, isn't it?" I wrote back. "Completely," she said. "You're welcome." We went on our first official date the following Saturday. Dinner at a small Italian place she knew. We talked until they started stacking chairs around us. By our third date, I was already thinking about things I hadn't thought about in years. Future things. Real things. And she seemed to be too, or at least, she was very good at making me believe she was. I understand now that this was the point. She was very, very good at it. Music shifts, something subtle, slightly darker enters underneath. The thing about Olivia was that she was always just slightly unavailable. Not coldly. Not in a way that felt like a red flag. Just, she had a full life. Or so it seemed. She was busy on certain nights, events she was coordinating, friends she'd committed to, family things she didn't elaborate on. I found it attractive, if I'm honest. She didn't rearrange her entire existence for me. She had a life. I respected that. I didn't know, at the time, exactly what that life contained. I didn't know that Wednesdays were for James. Or that Sunday mornings, the ones where she said she liked to keep for herself, no phones, just peace, were for Ethan. I just knew that when she was with me, she was with me. Completely present. Fully attentive. She made every person she was with feel like the only one. That, I would later learn, was her particular gift. And her particular cruelty. Let me tell you what 11 months with Olivia looked like. From the inside, from the place where I was standing, seeing only what she wanted me to see. Month 1 was electric. The early stage of something that feels inevitable, every conversation a discovery, every silence comfortable in the way that only happens when you've found someone who fits. She remembered things. Small things. I mentioned offhand, early on, that I hated the smell of synthetic vanilla, something I'd never told anyone because why would you? And 3 weeks later, when she baked something for the first time at my apartment, she used real vanilla bean. I didn't even remember telling her. She did. That's the kind of detail that makes a person feel truly seen. Month 2, we established a rhythm. Tuesday evenings were usually ours, dinner at mine or hers, or a walk somewhere if the weather was good. The occasional Friday. A Sunday afternoon here and there. I didn't notice the pattern then. How the time we spent together was always somehow contained. Tidy. Predictable. I thought, she's a planner. So am I. This works. Month 3, I met her friend Clara. Just Clara, no one else from her life. But Clara seemed to know about me, which felt significant. It felt like being let into something. I didn't wonder, then, whether Clara knew the full picture. She didn't, as it turned out. Clara only knew her Tuesday version. Month 4, we had our first disagreement. It was small, about plans that changed last minute. She cancelled on me a Friday with an hour's notice. I was more disappointed than I let on. She apologized, genuinely, and made it up to me the following week. I let it go. Month 5, I told her I loved her. We were sitting on the floor of her apartment, take-out containers between us, some documentary playing in the background that neither of us was watching anymore. It just came out. Not planned. Not dramatic. Just, I love you. She looked at me. And she said, I love you too. And the way she said it quietly, carefully, like it meant something, I believed her completely. I still don't know, honestly, whether she meant it. That's the part that keeps me up sometimes. Not the betrayal. Not the logistics of how she managed it. But whether any of it, any single moment, was real. Month 6 through 9 passed the way comfortable relationships do. The electricity settles into something warmer. Less urgent. More like a home than a spark. She had a key to my apartment by month 7. She kept a few things there: a toothbrush, a jacket, a book she was reading. I thought of these things as roots. Small, quiet roots taking hold. I didn't know she had a key to another apartment too. I didn't know there were roots somewhere else. Two somewhere else's. Here is what I know now, that I didn't know then. Her name was Olivia Park, 29 years old. Event coordinator. All true. What was not true or not complete was everything else. The family things on certain weekends were not family. They were James, 34, a teacher, who had been seeing her since the previous February. 4 months before me. The personal Sundays she kept sacred were not personal. They were for Ethan, 27, a photographer, who had met her at one of the events she coordinated and had been in her life for nearly as long as James. 3 men. 3 different versions of the same woman. James got the Olivia who was warm and domestic. She cooked for him, she talked about the future, she made him feel stable and chosen. Ethan got the Olivia who was adventurous and spontaneous. She went to his exhibitions, she talked about travel, she made him feel like life was something to run toward. I got the Olivia who was intellectual and present. She read the books I recommended, she asked deep questions, she made me feel understood. She had studied us, I think. Understood what each of us needed most. And become, for each of us, exactly that. It was, in its terrible way, almost impressive. None of us suspected a thing. Not for 11 months. The first crack, looking back, was in month 9. I called her on a Tuesday afternoon, not our usual evening, just a spontaneous call. She answered on the second ring, slightly breathless, and said she was just finishing up a work thing and could she call me back in an hour. She called back in 53 minutes. I noticed the 53 minutes. Filed it away. Told myself it meant nothing. The second crack was a name. She called me James once. We were in the middle of a completely ordinary conversation, something about a restaurant we were debating trying, and she said, "I think you'd love it, James." Then stopped. "Sorry," she said immediately. "James is a colleague." You'd think I could keep names straight. She laughed. A normal laugh. I laughed too. But something very small and very quiet sat down in the back of my mind. And didn't leave. The third crack was a photograph. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. We were looking through her phone together. She was showing me photos from an event she'd coordinated, something she was proud of. She was swiping through, and for just a second, a photo appeared that wasn't from the event. It was her. Somewhere outdoors. Smiling. With a man I didn't recognize. His arm around her shoulders. She swiped past it quickly. "Old photo," she said, without me asking. I didn't ask. But I thought about it for 3 days. By month 10, the small quiet thing in the back of my mind had grown legs. I wasn't acting on it. I wasn't confronting her. I wasn't even sure I was right. But I had started to notice the architecture of our relationship in a way I hadn't before. The consistency of the days we spent together. Always Tuesday. Often Friday. Sometimes Sunday afternoon but never Sunday morning. The way she never suggested I come to any event. She coordinated her job despite the fact that she talked about her work constantly. The way she always came to my apartment rather than having me come to hers. The few times I had been to her place, it had always been planned, never spontaneous. I had never just shown up at her door. The thought of doing so had somehow never occurred to me. Until month 10. Until the thing in the back of my mind said, very quietly, why hasn't it? I didn't show up unannounced. I'm not that person. But I started paying closer attention. And the closer I looked, the more the edges of things didn't quite line up. The truth didn't come out the way I expected. It didn't come from me investigating. It didn't come from a dramatic confrontation or a caught text message. It came from a coincidence so ordinary it almost felt like the universe was making a point. Month 11. A Saturday in February. I was at a coffee shop I didn't usually go to, one near my office, which I'd stopped into because I was in the area for a meeting that had finished early. I was sitting by the window, laptop open, coffee going cold beside me. And I looked up. Across the street. Olivia. Walking with someone. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of easy posture that suggests someone comfortable in their own skin. They were laughing about something. She was touching his arm. I sat very still. I watched them walk to the corner, stop, talk for another moment. And then she leaned up and kissed him. Not a friend kiss. Not an ambiguous greeting. A kiss. I looked back at my laptop screen. I closed it. I sat there for a long time. And I thought about the name. James. The colleague. The laugh. I thought about the photograph. I thought about the Sunday mornings she kept for herself. And I thought about 11 months of Tuesday evenings and Friday nights and the book she'd handed me in a shop and the way she'd said I love you on the floor of her apartment like she meant it. And I made a decision. Not to confront her. Not yet. First, I needed to know if I was right. And if I was right, I needed to know everything. I am, by nature, methodical. I don't react before I understand. It took me 2 weeks and a level of personal investigation I am not entirely proud of, but which I am not entirely ashamed of either. I found James first. It wasn't difficult, once I knew to look. He was tagged in a photo on a mutual connections social media, an event Olivia had coordinated 8 months earlier. There he was in the background. And there she was, beside him, in a way that people stand beside someone they're with. I sent him a message. Carefully. Without accusation. Just, hi, I think we might know someone in common. Would you be open to a conversation? He replied within an hour. Sure. Who? I typed her name. He didn't reply for 6 hours. Then, when can you talk? James and I spoke for the first time on a Thursday evening. He was calm. Measured. A teacher, it showed in the way he gathered information before responding to it. We compared notes carefully. Specific dates, specific things she'd said. Specific ways she'd explained her unavailability. By the end of the call, the shape of it was undeniable. There might be someone else, James said. Another one. I think so too, I said. Finding Ethan took another week. He found us, actually. James had done his own searching after our call and found a photographer Olivia had mentioned once, someone she'd said was a professional contact. Ethan, when James reached out, went very quiet on the phone for a long moment. Then he said, "How long have you known?" 2 weeks, James said. "I've known for 4 days, Ethan said. I wasn't sure I was right." He was right. We were all right. 3 men. 1 woman. 11 months. We agreed to meet. We met on a Sunday evening at a bar none of us had been to before. A neutral location. That had been James's suggestion. He was practical about it, a teacher's instinct to establish ground rules before the conversation began. I got there first. Got a table in the back. Ordered water. James arrived 5 minutes later. Taller than I expected. He shook my hand firm, steady, the handshake of someone who was holding themselves together by concentrating on small normal things. Ethan came in 3 minutes after that. Younger than us, you could see it not in his face exactly but in the way he was carrying this. Less contained. The shock still fresh on the surface. We sat. For a moment, none of us said anything. And then James said, "Well." And somehow that single word, flat, quiet, almost wry, broke something loose, and we all exhaled at the same time. We talked for 3 hours. I won't tell you everything that was said. Some of it was too private, not mine to share, not theirs. But I'll tell you this, at some point in that first hour, Ethan put his phone on the table. He had a photo, the two of them, from a trip they'd taken in the autumn. She was laughing, looking away from the camera. It was a beautiful photo. James looked at it for a moment. Then he reached into his wallet and put down a small photo print, old-fashioned, the kind you get developed. Her, at a kitchen table. His kitchen table. Comfortable. Home. I didn't have a photo. But I described the bookshop. The 30 minutes that became 2 hours. The vanilla bean. And somehow that was worse. Somehow the details were the most devastating part. Because she hadn't just been doing this with her time. She had been doing it with care. Real care. Specific, particular, remembered care. That wasn't carelessness. That wasn't someone stumbling into something and not knowing how to get out. That was intention. That was a person who had decided, consciously, to build 3 separate love stories simultaneously and had been skilled enough, and organized enough, and perhaps human enough to make each one feel real. "What do we do?" Ethan said eventually. James and I looked at each other. "We tell her," James said. "Together. We didn't ambush her. I want to be clear about that." James sent her a message. Simple. Asking if she could meet him and 2 friends of his for dinner on Friday evening. A restaurant. Public. Calm. She said yes. She didn't know, when she walked in that Friday, who the 2 friends would be. I saw the exact moment she understood. She walked in, smiled at James, and then her eyes moved to the table. To me. To Ethan. And the smile didn't disappear. It didn't collapse dramatically. It just became very still. Like a screen that's frozen mid-frame. She stood at the edge of the table for 3 full seconds. And then she sat down. I had expected many things from that conversation. Tears. Denial. Excuses. Anger. What I did not expect was what actually happened. She sat down. She looked at each of us in turn. And she said, "I know why you're here." That was all. No performance. No deflection. Just, "I know." James was the one who spoke first. He was the steadiest of us, or at least he seemed it on the surface. He asked, simply, "Why?" And she took a long time to answer. When she did, she didn't give us a clean explanation. She didn't say she was broken, or that she had commitment issues, or that she'd been hurt before and this was how she protected herself. She said, "I don't have a good answer. I know that's not what you want to hear. I know it's not enough. But I genuinely don't have one." Ethan said, "Did you love any of us?" She looked at him for a long moment. "I think," she said quietly, "that's the part I'm most afraid of. Because the honest answer is yes. And I know that doesn't make sense alongside everything else." The table was very quiet. We didn't shout. We didn't make a scene. This was not that kind of ending. It was quieter than that. And somehow the quiet made it worse. I drove home alone that Friday night. No music. No podcast. Just the city going past the windows. I sat in my car outside my building for a while before going in. I thought about the bookshop. The tilting. The 30 minutes. I thought about the vanilla bean. I thought about sitting on her floor saying "I love you" and meaning every syllable. And I let myself feel it fully, without trying to manage it for the first time. All of it. The loss. The confusion. The particular grief of loving something that turned out to be partly a construction. I called James 2 days later. He was doing what people do when their world has shifted, putting one foot in front of the other and not thinking too far ahead. We talked for an hour. Not about her. About other things. Normal things. It felt important to have a normal conversation. He's become a genuine friend, actually. Which is the strangest and perhaps only good thing to come out of any of this. Ethan I heard from once, a short message, a few weeks later. He said he was all right. That he was going to take some time for himself. I understood. As for Olivia, I haven't spoken to her since that dinner. I don't think I will. Not because I hate her. I spent a long time waiting to hate her, and it just never quite arrived. Mostly I feel sad. For all of us. Including her, in whatever complicated way she was living, managing 3 versions of herself, never fully present anywhere, always moving between lives like someone who can't find the door marked home. That sounds like exhausting work. It sounds like a life built on sand. My phone still has her contact saved. I haven't deleted it. I'm not sure why. Maybe because deleting it feels like erasing something real. And whatever else it was, whatever else she was. The Tuesday evenings were real. The bookshop was real. The 30 minutes that became 2 hours. Those were real. At least they were to me. And I've decided slowly, imperfectly, some days more convincingly than others, that I'd rather have loved something real to me that turned out to be complicated, than to have never walked into that bookshop at all. People ask me, how do you move on from something like that? And I always think for a second before answering. Because the honest answer is, slowly. One ordinary day at a time. You make coffee. You go to work. You call a friend. You find yourself laughing at something and then feeling guilty for laughing, and then deciding the guilt isn't worth it. And somewhere in the middle of all those ordinary days, without noticing exactly when it happened, you realize you've stopped looking for her in every room you walk into. That's not healing. Not completely. But it's a start. My name is Ryan. I was one of 3 men who loved the same woman. None of us knew. But I knew this, for 11 months, on Tuesday evenings, when she sat across from me. Something in that room was real. And I choose to keep